The stars were silent as the Virax fleet entered Earth's solar system. Massive ships, glowing with a blue light, passed the planets with ease. The Virax were a race of invaders, strong, merciless, and advanced beyond human imagination. Their ships could tear through any defense, and their weapons could destroy entire cities with a single strike. At the center of the fleet, the Virax commander, Czar, stood on his bridge, staring at the planet below. Earth. He had heard rumors about this primitive world, but now he could see it with his own eyes. A beautiful world, blue oceans and green lands. But the Virax had no interest in beauty. They were conquerors. They had destroyed countless worlds before this one. And Earth would be no different. "We will take this planet in less than a day," Jar said to his officers, his voice cold and filled with confidence. "Their technology is nothing. Their people are weak." His officers nodded, already preparing for the invasion. But Czar's eyes narrowed as he remembered something odd. He had heard stories about Earth's legends, stories of creatures called dragons, fire-breathing beasts from ancient myths. He had thought it was a joke. What kind of intelligent species believed in such things? A low laugh echoed across the bridge. It was Zoran, a young Virax officer who had heard about the dragons too. He was looking at a data pad filled with human history. "Dragons," Zoran said, shaking his head. "How foolish. They think these creatures are real. Perhaps they're a symbol of human weakness, a fantasy to make them feel strong in their stories. How pathetic." Czar joined in the laughter. "Yes, I have heard of such tales. Ancient monsters that breathe fire. Ridiculous. We are the Virax. We conquer entire star systems. What can a few silly stories do? This planet will be ours by nightfall." He wasn't concerned, not even for a moment. The Virax had never met a force they couldn't destroy, and Earth's dragons, if they even existed, would be nothing compared to their superior technology. As the fleet descended towards Earth, the Virax commanders laughed louder. They made jokes about the dragons, mocking the very idea of them. "What next?" one asked. "Will the humans call upon their wizards to fight us?" "It doesn't matter," Char replied. "We will wipe them out before they even know what's happening." The ships moved closer to the planet, the huge blue orb growing larger and larger in their view screens. The Virax forces were eager for the fight. They knew that humans were weak. They had seen Earth's defenses before and laughed at the outdated weapons. This would be quick, easy. But the humans were about to surprise them. They had no idea that on Earth, something ancient and powerful was about to awaken. While the Virax fleet moved closer to Earth, far below, hidden deep beneath the surface, something ancient began to stir. The world had been peaceful for centuries, but the coming of the Virax was about to change everything. The dragons, Earth's forgotten guardians, were waiting, dormant, and hidden for thousands of years. Now, the time had come. In a small, quiet town, far from the cities the Virax would attack, a group of humans gathered in secret. They were the guardians, the keepers of the dragons. These humans had been entrusted with the dragon's secret long ago, passed down through generations. They were not ordinary people. They were chosen to protect the powerful creatures hidden beneath Earth. The guardians knew that the dragons were no myth. They had seen the beasts with their own eyes. Tall as mountains, with scales that shimmered like diamonds, and wings as wide as buildings. These dragons had survived since the dawn of time. Untouched by human history, they had been born in the age of fire and legends. They were the true rulers of the sky, and they were ready to rise again. The leader of the guardians, a man named Leo, stood at the head of the group. His face was grim, and his eyes held a deep understanding of the situation. He had been training for this moment his entire life. The Virax were coming, and the dragons would have to fight. "We've kept them hidden long enough," Leo said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The time to awaken them has come. The Virax think they can destroy us, but they don't know what's buried beneath their feet." A young woman named Maya stepped forward, her face filled with determination. She was the newest member of the Guardians, and though she had only recently learned of the dragons, she understood the importance of the task ahead. "They'll be unstoppable," Maya said. "The Virax have no idea what's about to happen." Leo nodded. "That's exactly why we must act now. We've trained for this moment, and it's finally here." The Guardians had kept the dragons in deep underground caverns, far from human eyes. These places were hidden from the world, sealed away by ancient magic and technology. Only the Guardians knew the way. Only they could awaken the dragons when the time was right. The Virax, with all their advanced weapons and technology, would never be able to find them. Leo and Maya led the group down into the earth, following a narrow tunnel that had been carved into the rock. The tunnel was old, its walls covered with markings and symbols that only the Guardians understood. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, and the darker the path stretched ahead of them. Finally, they reached the great cavern, the heart of the dragon's home. The ground shook with the sound of distant thunder, but it was not the storm that had caused it. It was the dragons. The great creatures were waking up. In the center of the cavern, ancient creatures stirred. Massive shadows moved, shifting in the dark. Slowly, the dragons began to rise from their slumber. Their eyes glowed like molten lava, and their breath seemed to echo through the cavern. They were real. Not myths, not legends, but living, breathing giants. Leo stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's time." With a powerful roar, the dragons stretched their wings, the sound echoing through the cavern like a great storm. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air was filled with the scent of fire and earth. The dragons were awake. "Let them come," Leo said, his voice filled with confidence now. "Let the Virax come. We are ready." Maya's heart raced as she watched the dragons take flight, their massive wings carrying them high into the sky. The sight was breathtaking, yet terrifying. These creatures could level cities with a single breath of fire. They had been Earth's secret, its final defense, and now they were ready to protect it. Above, the Virax were preparing for the invasion. They had no idea that the real battle was about to begin. The dragons, Earth's hidden power, were no myth. They were real, and they were ready to fight. The Virax fleet moved in, their ships cutting through space like knives through soft cloth. They were ready. Their weapons were powerful, and their strategy flawless. Sar, the Virax commander, stood at the front of the bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen. A smirk played on his lips. "It's almost too easy," Sar muttered to himself. "This planet won't stand a chance." Below, in Earth's skies, the first Virax ships entered the atmosphere, releasing smaller dropships that rained down on the cities below. Buildings crumbled under the power of their weapons. Explosions lit up the skyline, and fires broke out as the Virax began their invasion. The humans fought back with everything they had: planes, tanks, and missiles. But it was no use. The Virax ships were too fast, too strong. Their weapons shattered the human defenses like glass. The human military, brave as they were, could do little against the alien forces. They tried to fight back, but they were outclassed. They were outmatched. At one of the battlefronts, General Thomas stood with his team, watching the destruction unfold. His face was grim, but he refused to let fear take hold. "We have to hold them off for as long as we can," he said, rallying his troops. "We might not win this, but we'll make them pay for every inch." The soldiers nodded, determined. They knew their chances were slim, but they couldn't give up. They fought with everything they had. But as the Virax forces stormed the streets, it became clear that their best efforts were only slowing down the inevitable. Meanwhile, Sar watched the battle from above, his eyes cold. His fleet hovered over the planet, launching attack after attack. "They fight bravely, but it will be their last fight," Sar said, his voice filled with certainty. "Their weapons are nothing compared to ours." His officers laughed. confident that the humans' resistance would soon be crushed. But they were wrong. They had no idea what Earth was hiding. In the dark caverns beneath the Earth, the dragons were preparing. Leo, Maya, and the other guardians stood at the entrance of the dragon's lair, watching as the massive creatures took to the skies. Their wings beat with great force, creating gusts of wind that shook the earth. The dragons were ready to fight, and nothing would stop them. Leo looked up at the sky, his heart pounding with anticipation. "This is it," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "The dragons will show the Virax the true power of Earth." The first dragon took off, its massive wings slicing through the air as it soared toward the city. Its eyes glowed with a fiery red light, and smoke billowed from its nostrils. The humans who saw it in the distance were in awe. The dragons were real, and they were coming. From above, the Virax noticed the dragons flying toward them. Their laughter quickly turned to confusion, then fear. They had no idea what to make of these creatures. "What is that?" one of the officers asked, his voice trembling. Zor narrowed his eyes. "Impossible. This is not a part of the plan." The dragons were unlike anything the Virax had ever seen. Their bodies were massive, covered in scales that shimmered like fire. Their wings stretched up like giant sails, and their roar shook the heavens. They were ancient creatures, born from a time long forgotten. And now, they had come to protect the planet. One of the dragons, the largest of them all, let out a mighty roar and dove toward the Virax ships. The force of its attack sent shockwaves through the air. The Virax tried to retaliate, firing their powerful weapons at the dragon. But the dragon was fast, dodging the lasers and missiles with ease. With a single flap of its wings, it created a storm of wind that sent Virax soldiers tumbling through the air. The dragon opened its mouth, and a blast of fire erupted, turning the Virax ships into burning wrecks. The alien soldiers screamed in terror as their weapons failed to protect them. The Virax fleet was being torn apart. The Virax, who had laughed at Earth's dragons, now realized the true power of the creatures they had underestimated. Back on the ground, General Thomas watched in amazement as the dragons fought. He had never seen anything like it. The Virax, once so sure of their victory, were now running in fear. "It's happening," Thomas whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The dragons are here." The invasion had begun, but the Virax would soon learn that Earth's hidden power was far greater than they ever imagined. The sky above Earth was filled with the sound of roaring dragons. Their wings sliced through the air like great blades, and their eyes burned with fiery anger. The Virax had never faced anything like this before. What they had thought was a simple conquest had now turned into a nightmare. Zor stood at the front of his ship, staring out at the chaos unfolding below. The dragons were everywhere. They soared high above, their fiery breath lighting up the sky. His officers looked around in panic, unsure of what to do. "Destroy them," Zor barked. "Focus all firepower on those creatures." The Virax fleet launched an attack, sending waves of missiles and laser blasts toward the dragons. But the creatures were faster than anything the Virax had ever encountered. With a powerful flap of their wings, they dodged the attacks, weaving through the skies like shadows. One dragon, its scales glittering like molten gold, let out a roar that shook the heavens. It was the largest and fiercest of them all. The sound of its voice was deafening, echoing through the air like the strike of 1,000 thunderclaps. The Virax ships shook as the dragon dove toward them, its massive claws reaching out to tear through the alien armor. The first Virax ship that came into the dragon's path didn't stand a chance. The dragon snapped its jaws, and with one swift movement, it crushed the ship in its teeth, sending it spiraling out of control. The dragon opened its mouth again, and a stream of fire erupted, turning the wreckage into a blazing inferno. The Virax officers on the ship stared in disbelief. They had never seen such power. What are these creatures?" one officer asked, his voice trembling. "They're not just legends," Zor growled. They are real, and they are destroying us. The battle raged on. The dragons attacked with deadly precision. One by one, Virak's ships were torn apart by their claws, their fire, and their speed. The aliens fired their weapons, but the dragons were too quick, too powerful. The Viraks had never faced an enemy like this, and they were starting to realize they were not as invincible as they had thought. On the ground, humans watched in awe. The dragons were tearing through the Virak's fleet with ease. General Thomas stood with his soldiers, his eyes wide as he watched the battle unfold. For a moment, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. "I can't believe it," Thomas muttered. "The dragons are real, and they're winning." Maya, standing beside him, smiled. "We never gave up on them. And now, they're giving everything to protect us." The dragons fought on, their fiery breath lighting up the sky. One dragon, a fierce red one with scales like burning embers, soared above the battlefield. It shot fire down onto the Virak's troops below, engulfing them in flames. The soldiers screamed in terror as the fire consumed them, their weapons useless against the dragon's fury. The Viraks began to retreat. They had underestimated the power of the dragons. The aliens had laughed when they first heard the stories of Earth's fire-breathing monsters, but now they were the ones running in fear. The dragons were showing no mercy, and the Viraks were no match for them. Tsar watched as his fleet began to fall apart. His ships were being destroyed one by one, and his soldiers were being hunted down like prey. His heart raced with panic. "We need to retreat," he said, his voice shaking. "This battle is lost." But it was too late. The dragons were already closing in. With a mighty roar, the largest dragon dove straight for Tsar's ship. The alien commander tried to fire his weapons, but the dragon was too fast. It reached out with its claws, ripping through the ship's armor and sending it tumbling through the air. The dragon let out another deafening roar as it swung its massive tail, sending the ship crashing to the ground in a fiery explosion. The Viraks had never felt fear like this before. They had invaded countless planets and crushed entire civilizations, but nothing had prepared them for the dragons of Earth. With their fleet in ruins, the remaining Viraks forces began to scatter. The dragons, with their mighty roars and fiery breath, had proven that they were Earth's true protectors. The invaders had underestimated them, and now they would pay the price. As the last of the Virak ships flowed into space, the dragons circled above, watching the retreat. Their roars echoed in the sky, a warning to any who would dare to challenge Earth again. For the humans, it was a victory beyond belief. The dragons had not only saved their planet, but had shown the power of Earth's hidden strength. And for the Viraks, it was a lesson they would never forget. The battle had turned into a nightmare for the Viraks. Their ships were falling from the sky, consumed by fire and smoke. The mighty dragons were unstoppable, tearing through the Virak's fleet with ease. The once proud invaders, who had believed Earth would be a simple conquest, were now running in fear. Tsar stood at the command center of his ship, his fists clenched. His face was filled with rage. The dragons had ruined everything. They had destroyed his fleet, shattered his plans, and broken his spirit. The great commander had never been so humiliated in his life. "They're everywhere." One of his officers cried, "We can't escape them. The dragons are hunting us down." Tsar's eyes burned with fury. He had underestimated the creatures of Earth. He had thought their legends were nothing more than stories. But now he knew the truth. These dragons were real, and they were far more powerful than anything the Viraks had ever encountered. "We need to retreat," Tsar said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get us out of here. Now." But it was already too late. The largest of the dragons, a massive beast with dark, black scales, had already spotted Tsar's ship. It soared high into the sky, its wings casting a shadow over the battlefield. The air grew hotter as the dragon closed in on the Virak ship. Tsar's officers scrambled to activate their defenses, but the dragon was too fast. With a deafening roar, it swooped down toward them. its fiery breath lighting up the sky. The dragon opened its mouth wide, and a massive blast of fire shot toward the Virax ship. The ship's shields flickered and sparked, but they couldn't withstand the dragon's inferno. The fire engulfed the ship, turning it into a giant fireball. The Virax screamed as the heat consumed them, their cries lost in the roar of the flames. Below, the battle raged on. The remaining Virax soldiers, desperate to escape, began to scatter in all directions. Some tried to flee into space, but the dragons were relentless. One by one, the Virax ships were torn apart, their wreckage falling to the ground like burning meteors. The sky was filled with fire as the dragons unleashed their fury. With every roar, with every burst of flame, the Virax forces were crushed. The city below, once under attack, was now a place of safety as the dragons drove the invaders away. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of the dragon's power. General Thomas watched from the ground, his eyes wide with amazement. The dragons were no longer just defending the planet. They were wiping out the Virax. Every breath of fire, every roar, seemed to shake the very earth. It was a sight that no one on Earth would ever forget. "It's over," Maya said, her voice full of disbelief. "The Virax are finished." Thomas nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. He had always known Earth had strength, but he had never imagined it would come in the form of dragons. Now, the invaders who had thought Earth was weak were learning the true meaning of strength. The largest dragon, the one with the black scales, flew high into the air. It let out a roar so powerful that it seemed to split the sky. Its wings beat with great force, creating a storm of wind that knocked the remaining Virax soldiers off balance. The dragon opened its mouth and unleashed another wave of fire, turning the Virax forces into ash. On the ground, the humans watched in awe. The fire from the dragons lit up the night sky, casting everything in an eerie glow. The Virax had been beaten, but the battle was not over yet. The dragons were still hunting, still burning their enemies from the sky. The flames seemed endless, as if the very earth itself was on fire. Sar, the Virax commander, had barely managed to escape the dragon's attack. His ship, damaged but still functional, was speeding away from Earth. The flames from the dragon's fire still burned in his memory. He had never felt so defeated. His fleet was gone, his soldiers were dead, and Earth had proven to be a force beyond his wildest dreams. As he watched the last of his ships retreat into space, Zar swore to himself. "We will return," he muttered. "This is not the end. Earth will fall. I swear it." But on Earth, the dragons had already won. The Virax had been driven off, their invasion crushed under the power of fire and fury. The humans, once facing certain defeat, now stood victorious. They had learned an important lesson. Earth was not weak. It was strong. And when threatened, it would unleash a power unlike anything the invaders could imagine. The dragon's roars echoed across the land, a final reminder to all that Earth would never be taken without a fight. The Virax fleet was falling apart. Ships, once proud and powerful, now lay in ruins, scattered across the sky and ground. The massive dragons had torn through them like paper, leaving nothing but ashes and broken metal. The Virax, who had come to Earth thinking it would be an easy conquest, were now desperate to escape. Zar, the Virax commander, stood on the bridge of his last remaining ship, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. His fleet had been wiped out. His soldiers were gone. His plan had failed. The humans had been strong, but it was the dragons that had truly broken them. "Retreat," Zar shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "We're leaving this planet. Now." His officers scrambled to obey. The ship's engines roared to life, and the last of the Virax fleet began to turn away from Earth. The dragons, though, were not finished. They still hunted the retreating invaders, their wings cutting through the air like blades, their fiery breath lighting up the sky. One dragon, the largest of them all, soared high above, its eyes locked onto the fleeing Virax ships. The air was hot with the dragon's anger. Its tail whipped through the sky, creating gusts of wind powerful enough to shake the ships. With a loud roar, the dragon dove toward the Virax fleet, its mouth opening wide as it prepared to unleash its fire. Xar's heart raced. "Not again," he muttered. "We can't survive another attack." But the dragon was already too close. It let out a terrifying roar as it shot a blast of fire directly at Xar's ship. The Virax shields flickered, but they couldn't hold up against the dragon's fury. The ship shook violently as flames surrounded it. The heat was unbearable. Xar's officers screamed as the fire ripped through the ship's outer layers, setting it ablaze. Xar grabbed the controls, trying to steer the ship away from the dragon's fiery breath. "Full speed ahead," he shouted. "Get us out of here." The ship lurched forward, barely escaping the dragon's fire. But the damage was done. The ship's engines were failing, and it was clear that they would not be able to escape Earth's atmosphere. On the ground, General Thomas and his soldiers watched as the last of the Virax ships attempted to flee. The dragons were still in pursuit, their roars echoing across the land. It was an incredible sight, one that no human would ever forget. "I never thought I'd see this day," Thomas said, his voice filled with awe. "The Virax are actually running." Maya, standing beside him, nodded. "The dragons aren't letting them get away. Not after everything they've done." One by one, the remaining Virax ships were chased down. The dragons attacked with brutal force. They soared through the sky, their fiery breath burning everything in their path. The Virax ships tried to flee, but they were no match for the dragon's speed and power. With every passing minute, the Virax were being pushed farther and farther away from Earth. The largest dragon, the one with black scales, was still leading the charge. It dived down toward a fleeing Virax ship, its wings creating powerful gusts of wind. The ship's engines sputtered and failed as the dragon's fire slammed into it, turning the ship into a mass of flames. The Virax crew inside screamed, but there was no escape. "This is it," one of Xar's officers said, his voice filled with fear. "We're not going to make it." Xar's face twisted in anger. "We have to make it," he growled. "Earth will fall. It's not over yet." But even as Xar spoke, the reality was clear. The Virax had lost. The dragons had shown them that Earth was not a planet to be conquered. It was a planet to be protected. The final few Virax ships made one last attempt to escape, heading toward the edge of the atmosphere. But the dragons were already there, waiting for them. With one final roar, the black-scaled dragon shot down from above, its fiery breath turning the last ships to ash. And with that, the Virax fleet was no more. The invaders had been defeated, their ships burned to nothing by the fury of Earth's protectors. Xar's ship, the last one remaining, was limping toward the stars, but it would never return. The Virax had learned a harsh lesson. Earth was not weak. And the dragons, the ancient protectors of this world, had proven that. On the ground, General Thomas looked up at the sky. The dragons were circling above, their roars echoing across the planet. The battle was over. The Virax were gone. Earth was safe. "We did it," Thomas said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We really did it." Maya smiled. "Thanks to the dragons. We couldn't have done it without them." The dragons continued to circle above, their fiery eyes watching the skies. They had defeated the invaders, and now they were free to return to their lairs, knowing that Earth was safe, at least for now. The battle was over. The Virax fleet, once so powerful, was now reduced to nothing. Their ships had been destroyed, their warriors turned to ashes, and their invasion of Earth had ended in utter defeat. The dragons circled above, their roars echoing across the sky, a final reminder of their victory. General Thomas stood with his soldiers, watching the last of the Virax ships disappear into space. The Earth was safe, but there was still one thing on his mind. "Do you think they'll come back?" Maya asked, her voice low. Thomas shook his head. I don't think so. The Virax have learned their lesson. Earth isn't a planet they can just conquer. And the dragons. He looked up at the dragons, their fiery eyes still watching from above. The dragons will make sure of that. Maya smiled. They really saved us, didn't they? Thomas nodded. They didn't just save us. They showed us what real power looks like. We never should have doubted them. For days, Earth had been filled with smoke and fire. The dragons had wreaked havoc on the Virax invaders. But now, as the flames slowly died down, the world began to return to normal. People started to rebuild, but the memory of the battle would never fade. The dragons, though, were not done yet. They still soared above, watching over Earth. Their wings beat with quiet strength, and their eyes never left the sky. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting for any threat to appear. But there was no more threat. The Virax were gone. Zor, the Virax commander, was drifting in space, his ship badly damaged. The once proud alien had been forced to flee Earth in disgrace. His fleet had been destroyed, his soldiers killed, and his dreams of conquest shattered. He floated alone in the dark expanse of space, his mind racing. How had it come to this? He had planned for everything, except the dragons. The humans, the Earthlings, had been weak in his eyes. He had thought it would be easy to take their world, but he had underestimated Earth's strength. He had underestimated the dragons. They'll pay for this, Xar muttered, his voice cold and filled with hatred. We will return, and when we do, Earth will fall. But even as he spoke, Xar knew it wasn't likely. The dragons had proven that Earth was not a world to be taken lightly. They had shown their power, and the Virax had paid the price. Back on Earth, the people rejoiced. They celebrated their victory, knowing that they had been protected by something ancient and powerful. The dragons had come when they were needed, and they had given everything to defend the planet. No one would ever forget their roars, their fire, or the feeling of safety they had brought. In the days that followed, the dragons began to retreat. They flew high into the mountains, returning to the places where they had once lived in peace. The humans, though, were not sad to see them go. They were grateful, but they knew that the dragons had done their job. Earth was safe once more. As the last dragon disappeared into the distance, General Thomas stood on a hilltop, looking up at the sky. The world was calm, and the air was clear. The battle was over. The Virax had been driven off, and Earth had shown its true strength. Thomas chuckled to himself, shaking his head. I guess we had the last laugh, didn't we? Maya stood beside him, looking up as well. We did, and we'll never forget it. The dragons, the ancient protectors of Earth, had shown the invaders that no one would take their planet without a fight. The Virax had laughed at the stories of fire-breathing beasts, thinking them nothing but myths. But when the dragons arrived, they learned the hard way that they had been wrong. The dragons' fire had burned away the fear, and the roar of their victory would echo in the hearts of Earth's people forever. The invaders had been defeated, and Earth stood strong. The last laugh had belonged to the humans, and to the dragons who had saved them. And so, the world moved forward. The memory of the battle remained, but the people of Earth knew one thing for sure. They were never alone. The dragons, though gone for now, would always be there, watching over them, waiting for the day they were needed again.